I first started this channel, I decided that my goal for it would be to talk about science fiction and fantasy by way of talking about other things. But at the same time, I was aware that at some point I was going to be talking about science fiction and fantasy work quite directly. I was just also convinced that I was going to do it in a way that was in line with my concerns. I didn't want to just talk about stuff that I liked and say, you'll like this. Or I didn't want to talk about things that were bad and say, this is why this is bad. Or even to take something apart and, deconstruct it and analyze it. And a part of that is because other people on YouTube and elsewhere are already doing such a fantastic job with that kind of work. They're talking about what to read, why it's great, or why to avoid it, what it really means, that kind of thing. What I want to do is talk about science fiction and fantasy favorites of mine as they exist in my life as an influence. And one of the things I found about influences is that they're two-sided. On the one hand, they can be tremendously stimulating and liberating. They can show you things you've never seen before. They can inspire you. They can send you in directions you never imagined you'd go in. On the other hand, they can also be limiting. They can constrain you. They can suffocate you. They can make you feel like you can't get out from under their shadow. And when I realized that I had many influences in my life that were like that for me, I also realized that if I didn't make a program for figuring out how to get out from under their shadow, I would never come into my own as a creator. So in this video and in a number of others that will come in the future, I'm going to talk about the influences that have been in my life that have come from the science fiction and fantasy world, and what I did to transcend those influences, what I did to try and get past them, to grow past them, without at the same time completely leaving them behind, because I don't believe you ever completely leave such things behind. The work I want to start with today is not going to surprise any of you because it's been a tremendous influence on just about everybody in this space in my generation. In fact, if you've been looking over my shoulder at any time during one of these previous videos, you've probably seen a copy of it lingering right there. I'm talking about the movie Blade Runner, and I'm also talking about the book, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? Now, I don't need to recap either of these works. Like I said before, there's so much discussion around them, how influential they are and what kind of spaces they've conjured in the minds of so many people and what kind of importance they have. What I'm going to concentrate on instead is how I encountered it originally, how that shaped me, and again, how I tried to find my way past that. In 1981 or so, I was a young'un. I was probably about 9 or 10 years old, and my father had a subscription to Omni magazine. And they ran an article in, I think, either late 1981 or early 1982, I'm not sure, where they were talking about the movie Blade Runner. And they went into great detail about it. And one of the wonderful things about a magazine like Omni at the time, when I didn't really have a lot of ways to learn about science fiction or fantasy generally, was that you could learn about stuff by reading the magazine and also by reading closely. Whenever they would mention something, I would go out and try to find out more about it. And so, of course, they mentioned the Philip K. Dick book. They mentioned some of the stuff that was in the book that was not going to be in the movie, and so on and so forth. And I didn't end up seeing the movie for a very long time. And I didn't end up encountering the book for a very long time either. When I finally did, I encountered the book long before I saw the film by itself. And the words life-changing really do apply to my experience with reading the book. I read the whole thing in about an afternoon, like a 4-hour stretch of a Sunday afternoon, if memory serves. And that spurred me to seek out pretty much everything else I could find by him. And at the time, I didn't have a whole lot of money, so I was stuck with the local library. They didn't have a whole lot either, but I did my best. Eventually, the film came my way, first in a chopped-up version on TV, which was still worth seeing anyway, and then later, when my parents finally got a VCR, by way of the VHS rental system that existed in our library circuit. The way this worked was they would get a different selection of movies every month. It would rotate between libraries in my county. And so if I had an adult library card, I was just able to check out anything I wanted, and I did. And I saw a great many terrific movies that way. Blade Runner was among them. And the impact of all of this, in a way, some of this is going to be really predictable because one of the preoccupations Philip K. Dick had in all of his books is what it means for something to be real and what it means to say that someone or something is human. And these were preoccupations that followed him through the whole of his career. And I picked up on them because I felt like these were the first times I was encountering those questions. Not in some abstract way, not in a highly theoretical way or in a textbook format, but in the form of a story that I could really dig into. And this was a big part of Dick's appeal generally, was that he would use pulp science fiction as a medium to convey things that were a whole lot brainier than what a lot of pulp science fiction was usually concerned with. And this also fed later on into my interest in Zen Buddhism, something that was also awakened by reading Gödel Bach around the same time, interestingly, when I was still really young. And through the whole of my adolescence and my young adult life, I found these questions recurring over and over again, coming back and working their way into the stories that I was trying to write. I say trying because they weren't very good. The very first thing that I produced that was novel length, which I wrote during, I think it was the summer of 94 or something like that. I don't even have a copy of this thing anymore, but it was definitely preoccupied with these same questions of what does it really mean to have an identity? What does it really mean to be a person? That kind of thing. So a lot of the stuff that was in Dick's orbit, so to speak, his mental preoccupations, became mine by proxy, because I was reading it and resonating with it and realizing these are the same things that I'm also concerned with. I'm concerned with them in a different form, but to get them from him was such a charge that it was hard to look away, and it was hard to think about other ways that the same questions could be contemplated. He gave me a template to do that. And once you have a template to do something, it's often very difficult to think of a different way to do it. And the other part of the influence, and this again is the kind of thing that doesn't really need explaining, is the space and the look that was conjured up by the film. You know, this huge, endless city, these liminal spaces where there was still some possibility, despite all of the gloom and the misery, to still be human and to still have feelings. When you watched Blade Runner, you were getting a feeling that you were watching the best incarnation you've seen of the archetypal city with a capital C that you've seen in any movie since the original 1927 Metropolis. And, you know, today we have stuff like Night City and Cyberpunk 2077 and so on, and they all feed back into this. It was the same thing with me. I looked at that, and it set this template, this standard for how to think about a near-future urban environment. It became very hard to see in your mind what such a place could be like without invoking Blade Runner in some form. And it was hard to get past that, not just for my own sake, but for the sake of whatever readers I wanted to reach out to. I didn't want to produce something and then have people say, oh, we saw that in Blade Runner. Or worse yet, have them read it and say, oh, that was nothing like what was in Blade Runner. It sucks. Because their expectations are not being met, you see? So then, over time, I realized I had to find a way outside of these templated preoccupations. I had to think bigger. And I have to say that the answer that I came up with for this is going to be much the same answer that I'm going to have for a lot of the other ways that I transcended other influences. And it just basically involves time and patience and attention. You wanted to live a little, you wanted to live with your eyes open. And those two things are among the best cures for transcending your influences. But how those things happen is also really important. So I'll start with the whole question of reality and selfhood. One of the things that became clear to me when I started studying Zen Buddhism was that it was not something that you were going to get the answers from in a prepackaged form. What you were given was a set of disciplines, a set of practices, a set of tools, basically, for how to confront those questions on your own terms, in your own time and space. And I said, well, if I'm going to confront these questions of reality and selfhood and make them my own, then I have to do it on my own terms. I have to do it through my own metaphors. I have to do it through what I'm encountering in my life, not what I've encountered by proxy through somebody else's fiction. The fiction can give me a good sense of how someone else worked through those questions themselves, how they created their own answer in the form of a work of fiction for it. But his answer is not my answer. And the sooner I accepted that, the easier it was for me to start assembling answers of my own, of also asking questions that were truly my own. So I had to live a little. I had to do my own practice. And I had to start putting words on paper of my own, words on paper that served as steps away from my influences. I mentioned that first book that I wrote in 94 or so. And even though it was no good, it was a step away in the right direction. I was saying, well, I don't have to copy anything that he's done. I don't have to self-consciously invoke him. I can do my own thing. It just takes effort. It just takes nerve. So I had to stop using Philip K. Dick's works as the blueprints or the schemas or the paradigms or even the inspirations for how to do this. I had to convince myself, he's not the only way this is possible. There are other ways that it is possible. It's great that he made this so accessible to somebody, especially somebody who likes science fiction. But I had to have faith that other ways were possible. And I had to have faith that I could make those ways mine. And also, on top of everything else, that to do all of this was not a rebuke to Philip K. Dick or his work. One of the first things you do when you grow as a writer is you learn to see your influences with the right respect, in the sense that you see them as finite and limited, as the product of a moment in time and space, but you don't see them as being something simply to be thrown away. And you really shouldn't. If your original attachment to something is primarily emotional, you should respect that. But you should understand that the attachment is primarily an emotional one. And you should find other emotional cultivations of your own that you can use to grow past it. So the second thing that happened was, trying to figure out how to get past these grand liminal spaces that the movie conjured up. How to think of my own kinds of things in that respect. Because I didn't just want to look at what I was seeing in the film or any other film inspired by it or any other book inspired by it and just copy the outside of it. You never want to just copy the outsides of the things that you're influenced by and call it a day. And one of the things that really hammered this home for me was how, if I had my eyes open, I could see many of the same things that had inspired the people who made these works too. That they were all right in front of me. I just had to notice them. I have a wonderful anecdote about this. This was probably sometime in 2002 or so, and I was walking around downtown in New York City. This was when I still lived near there, that I could just go into the city on a whim if I wanted to. And I encountered what I could charitably describe as a junk shop. It was a storefront where the door and the shop window, you could see, were filled to chest height, all the way to the back of the building, with the most astonishing assortment of stuff that just looked like it had been harvested from 20 different thrift stores and just dumped in indiscriminately. And the proprietors were these two old guys who sat out in front on lawn chairs. And the way it worked was you went to them and you asked them, do you have anything like this? And they would basically go in there and forage for it and come back, and you would buy it by the carload. You buy by volume. And part of how I learned how all this worked was because the first time I dropped by, I saw that they were in the middle of haggling with this woman who was a property buyer for a movie studio. And she was trying to get her hands on things like guitar pedals and amplifiers and things like that. And they were like, oh yeah, we got tons of that stuff. I found out later that she was buying props for the movie School of Rock. And I was fascinated. I couldn't tear my eyes away because I said, this place is a fire hazard, man. They're going to shut this place down. And sure enough, later on, when I went back to look for it again, it and the entire rest of the block had been redeveloped drastically. Was never able to find it. I couldn't even find it on Google Maps. Google Maps does not, as far as I can tell, go back far enough to the point where it was still extant. But the experience had a great impact on me. It said to me, if you're looking for inspiration for crazy urban spaces, for these liminal spaces, these cyberpunk spaces, guess what? They're out there. You just have to go looking for them. You have to make a little bit of effort on your own. You could be inspired by reading about it in a book somewhere, but the best way to encounter it is to encounter it. This is actually one of the things I really like about, for instance, channels on YouTube where they'll have people just walk around a city with a camera and not make any commentary. Just point the camera, for hours on end at what's going past. And if you watch enough of that kind of thing, you get all kinds of wonderful, unfiltered glimpses of our world. But there's really no substitute for doing it yourself whenever you can. And not only just to take this stuff in, but also to think about why it exists. How did a shop like this ever come into existence? How hard a fight did these guys put up to keep it into existence? Where did they get all of this stuff? Where did they go after all this was over? And these were questions that I kept alive for a long time after that. And I've yet to still work them into anything. The point is that I have never forgotten about them. So I would say there's basically three things. And again, I'm going to be revisiting these with each of these videos. Three things to do when you find that something has been a tremendous influence on you, science fiction or otherwise. And the first is, don't just copy the outsides of it. Turn the rock over, so to speak. Look what's under there. Find out what led to the choices that the creators made to make things this way. And those are often much more fascinating than just copying the surface anyway. The second thing to do is to look in yourself for the same impulses that drove that kind of creation. Ask what it is that you've got in your life, in your spirit, that seeks you to do something in the same way. And find your own expression for it. And that may not be something that you can find right away. That may be something that you have to make multiple attempts at. But the point is to try. And the third is to have faith in time and experiences to give you distance, healthy distance, constructive distance from your influences. Let the distance of time and the weight of new experiences inform your understanding of those influences. Don't feel bad if you wake up one morning and realize that something that you loved as a kid doesn't seem as lovable anymore. That's normal. That's healthy. In fact, that's telling you a good deal about what kind of a person you're becoming. So the things that we love, yes, they're precious to us, but that doesn't mean they're sacred. That doesn't mean they're inviolable. Give yourself permission to look at them, to interrogate them, take them apart, turn the rock over. Don't let those influences just remain these artifacts in glass cases in a museum. I mean, even the artifacts that are in glass cases in museums, those don't remain untouched either. Our understandings of them, the context that they existed in, those are all changing as we make more and more discoveries about the past. One of my favorite discoveries in this vein when I was young was when I found out that the Greek temples weren't these, chased ivory buildings. They were, in fact, painted very gaudily and with a lot of bright colors and gold leaf. We know this now. But back then, it was easy to look at them and to see them as something that was just immutable. But they're not. They change with our understanding. And all the things that we love also change with our understanding. So again, finally, for me, Blade Runner was a big thing because of what it said about personhood and memory and all of the spaces that it conjured up to have all of these things happen in. But just copying the way those things are done wasn't going to do it for me. And in the work that I'm trying to do, I've learned how to put space between the influence and the thing that I'm creating, and I hope I'm successful. So in the future, I'm going to be talking about other things like this. 2001, for instance, that's another easy one. You can see that over my shoulder too. Or trickier stuff like Godfrey Reggio's film Koyaanisqatsi. That's another one that I think also gets treated in a very specific way. And I'm going to try to find what I hope is a non-cliched way to talk about that, because it's actually very close to my heart too. But for now, here's the way that I dealt with Blade Runner being so close to my heart. And I hope it helps some of you who may be struggling from the same thing too. See what you think.